You could feel the presence. You know, George Washington Carver's buried there with his three wives, and you could just feel, and that's how I felt. I felt that same presence.
Okay.
Walking. Ugh.
The Hockley family cemetery is part of a plot of land that was received by Jane Warren in 1873. It was part of 57 acres of land that was deeded to her. Jane Warren was the patriarch of the Hockley Freeman Clay family. She was a former slave, originally born in Alabama around 1825, and so she had come to San Antonio, and after emancipation she received the deed to some 57 acres of land there in northeast San Antonio, and set aside about 1.26 acres to be burial ground for her family and other black families in the area.
Stop what you're doing. Please take your tools with you so they don't get misplaced. We're going to have to head out into the easement. Everybody.
It's in northeast San Antonio, and it is currently a neighborhood that's known as the Northern Hills subdivision. That subdivision was built in 1980s and was developed after the land was acquired from the descendants of the Hockley Freeman Clay family.
As a historian, I think it's extremely important to maintain just the history of our city, and something like this where we're cleaning up a cemetery is such a sacred ground. I think it's very important for not only our culture but our community and the health of it to make sure things like this and our ancestors are giving due respect.
And they have records of burials dating back to the early 1900s and as late as the 1970s. You wouldn't know it when you see it. It would just look like any old back alley for a subdivision, but it actually is an easement that's set aside for access to the burial plot. The Hockley descendants tell us that they have memories of attending funerals there.
There are no words. There are no words. Absolute gratitude, humbleness. There's a sense of humility that comes with it because of the movement that has happened as a result of previous findings from other areas that have led to this day. It's amazing.
So the way that the cemetery plot was discovered was a resident in the neighborhood, a retired Air Force captain, would walk his dog and with his children, and would pass by this overgrown area that's set apart from the rest of the neighborhood. He always wondered, I wonder what that used to be, and so eventually he starts digging up, looking at some historical records, and he has a hunch that it may be property that was formerly owned by black people in the area. And so he contacted Mr. Everett Fly, knowing that he was doing some work on other rediscovered black cemeteries in San Antonio. And sure enough, he was able to confirm that this was once the property of Jane Warren. The cemetery had gone untended since the 1980s. The family had been receiving tax bills from the city, and worried about whether or not they owed those monies that were due to the city, and so it really wasn't tended to for a couple of decades, and so it was quite overgrown. It was used as a dumping area. The residents of the neighborhood really had no idea. There was no markings to designate it as a burial ground, and so they didn't know that they were desecrating sacred land. Once it was confirmed that it was a burial ground, we worked with the city to have those tax bills waived and organize some volunteers to go in there and clean up the site. We don't need to cut anything down to the ground. We don't need to pick anything up that's either stone or metal at this point. If it's obviously garbage, that's okay, but don't worry about that. We're mostly trying to cut and clear. We're mostly trying to cut it and clear it. We'll let somebody come back and clean up the stuff off the ground later. It was like a jungle going in there. We had not only overgrown area, but also it was used for a dumping site. The residents in the neighborhood had no idea that it was a burial ground, and so we had quite a bit of cleanup to do. We had over 200 volunteers step up to support the cleanup effort. Many of the Friends of SACAM, our volunteer corps, got involved. They got some of their friends and family involved, but we also put out a call to the community, and so some residents from the neighborhood came in and helped with the cleanup. A number of student groups from UTSA, from the African American Studies program, and other service organizations got involved, and we were very lucky to have 200 individuals come out over a Saturday and do a cleanup with us.
We have this historic site, the Mitchell Mowerman site on the south side of our campus, and with Everett Fly, where I came into contact with him, and then him looking and finding black settlements all over town, it makes the point that, you know, the black history is all over.
So the cemetery qualifies for protection under the State of Texas Antiquities Act and also under the City of San Antonio Historic Preservation Ordinance. So we intend to put up a historic marker to tell more about the site and the families that are buried there. We also want to provide easy access for the family to go in and pay their respects and have regular cleanup projects to make sure that it stays and maintains a pristine site. We also want to coordinate some educational programs with Northern Hills Elementary School adjacent to the cemetery and other Northeast Independent School District schools to have them learn more about African Americans in San Antonio and in their local area. The Hockley Cemetery will also be one of the stops on SACAM's Black Heritage tours of historic cemeteries in the area, and so it'll be one of many sites available for local residents or visitors from outside of San Antonio to see important sites in Black history.